So I got the throttle servo installed with the linkage, and I've had a number of discussions with people about how do you set up your throttle arm so you get a nice linear feel on your stick. And this is a little trick that Andy New showed myself and a few others years ago, and ever since I've been using this method, I just love the way that my throttle feels versus the stick motion. So I'll try to explain this. He did a much better job at explaining it than I will, but here goes. That is basically idle, okay? And this is full throttle. Idle, full throttle. So why do I have it set up that way? Well, in order to explain why I have it that way, we have to understand how the carburetor works on a gas engine. If that is idle right there, those that have played with gas engines know that for, let's call it a few millimeters of motion of this ball link forward, the motor is very, very sensitive, right? The RPM will change quite a bit. But if you're 3/4 throttle, the same amount of motion, a couple millimeters of forward motion of this ball link, the RPM of a motor will not change very much. So a carburetor is very sensitive to motion at the low end and not very sensitive to motion at the high end. So the way Andy taught a bunch of us how to set up our throttle linkage is to set up your throttle linkage to be opposite the way that a carburetor behaves. And it will counteract this weirdness with a carburetor, and you get a nice linear feel. So if I don't want, for the same degree of rotation of a servo arm, if I don't want much movement at the beginning, but lots at the end on my servo, I set it up like this. So if you were to fix your eye on, say, this joint here where the clevis meets the threaded rod, for the same degree of rotation of this arm, let's say 10 degrees, you can see that this point does not move very far forward, right? You can see it only moves a couple millimeters forward. But if my throttle is in this position, for that same small degree of rotation, you can see that this moves significantly more forward. Okay, so basically we have our throttle servo set up opposite to the way that a carb behaves, and the two cancel out and you get a nice linear feel. And so ever since Andy kind of showed me that technique and gave me that explanation, I always set it up like this. And on my transmitter, I'm about -90, +90. So I still have a lot of resolution on this servo because I went with a nice short arm. But the trick is at idle, have your arm pointing back as far back towards the tail as possible. And at full throttle, have your arm basically almost perpendicular to your servo body. It really, really changes the way that your throttle feels in the air. And you don't have to put in hardly any curve at all in your throttle setup on your radio to counteract the weird feel that a gas engine has. Hopefully that helps.